Today from the global lane, anti-Semitism rising. Trump sets his sights on Columbia University.
This has been going on for almost a year and a half. Jews do not feel safe.
Tragic awakening, exposing the parallel between Adolf Hitler and today's hate war against the Jews.
There is a straight line from the Holocaust to the radical Islamist war against the Jews that are happening today, and frankly, a straight line against Judeo-Christian values.
Not just tariffs, Trump's fight against European Union digital service taxes on American tech giants.
What the EU has done has been analogous to what a credit card fraudster would do. This is basically going to be viewed as an attack on American businesses that will be met with reciprocity.
And challenging Arab leaders at the UN about their hypocrisy over Gaza.
I want to testify before God and you, Israel is not the problem.
And it's all right here on the global lane. Anti-Israel hatred on full display at Columbia University's Barnard College. Anti-Zionism or anti-Semitism? Now the Trump administration is reviewing more than $5 billion in promised grants to Columbia. Raphael Shore is the author of the book, Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Jew? And a documentary film producer of Tragic Awakening. Rabbi Shore is also the founder of the Clarion Project. That's an organization that exposes Islamic threats to the West, and Open Door Media, a company that addresses anti-Semitism on college campuses. Rabbi Shore, last week, anti-Israel protesters seized a building at Barnard College, demanding amnesty for 2 students who were expelled for interrupting a history of modern Israel class. Jewish students struggled just to get to class, and then some of those Jewish students wanted to stage a counter-protest, but they weren't allowed into the building. So HHS, the Department of Education and General Services, announced, in addition to the review of grants, they may halt more than $50 million in contracts to the university due to, quote, ongoing inaction in the face of relentless harassment of Jewish students. Your thoughts on that?
I think it's a good move. Look, this has been going on for almost a year and a half, since October 7th, a shocking pogrom against the Jewish people in Israel, which was then met by pro-Hamas rallies all over universities in North America, which frankly traumatized the entire generation of young Jewish students. I have a nephew who's at NYU. He had to leave the college. All the professors, all the students came out against him, pro-Hamas. It was just shocking. And these are students who are Jewish but not so involved, not pro-Israel. So the tolerance at these universities of the racism and anti-Semitism was just egregious and was not dealt with a proper heavy hand that it needed to be. And as a result, it just keeps going. And it's really terrible because Jews do not feel safe. I think the last poll showed 80% of Jewish students have seen and experienced anti-Semitism on their campuses. That's unacceptable.
Beyond Columbia, President Trump recently signed an executive order establishing an anti-Semitism task force to investigate and ensure that colleges and universities do more to protect Jewish students from anti-Semitism. So what do you think of that step? Does it go far enough?
Well, it's the right direction. You know, this is what needs to happen, and there needs to be financial consequences, and these universities need to think twice. And unfortunately, they're major businesses, these universities, and the only thing that's really going to speak to them is financial disincentives. So I think it is the right direction. And listen, I wrote my book on this subject because I think that young people need to understand the nature of this phenomena. What is going on? After October 7th, everybody's asking, I thought this was over. I thought anti-Semitism was over.
Well, it's not just them. Since October 7th, more than 10,000 anti-Semitic incidents have been reported in the United States. So tell us about the film you've just produced about October 7th, Tragic Awakening. Most of our viewers would agree that the massacre of Jews that day was a tragedy, but have we awakened to the reality as to why it occurred and the possibility that it could happen again?
Well, that's the idea, tragic awakening. It was such a tragedy, but through the tragedy, the question is being asked, why the Jews? Why is it that 3,000 years this phenomena of Jew hatred is going on and it still has not ceased? We thought it was over after World War II. No, it's not over. The Islamists are still trying to destroy the Jewish people. Now we see in America a movement of anti-Semitism larger than we ever thought possible. We need to get to the root of it. And that's why I created this film and the book, to get to the deeper understanding, because we've had a superficial understanding, thinking that it's just regular bias, regular prejudice, but anti-Semitism goes much deeper, and I probe Hitler's ideology in depth in the book to show that Hitler understood who the Jews were, and he understood it was an ideological war, that the Jewish people actually are making a deep impact on civilization in ways that he doesn't want to, because evil tries to prevent the ideologies of humanitarianism that are coming into the world. So that's what we need to get to the depth of, so that we can be protected against the onslaught.
Up next, parallels between Nazism and modern-day Islamic extremism, and Adolf Hitler's view of Christians and the big bad Jews. Adolf Hitler, Christians, Jews, and anti-Semitism. More now with film producer and author Raphael Shore. In your 2005 film, Obsession, you presented the idea of a parallel between the Nazi movement in World War II Germany and the Islamic extremism that we're witnessing today. And that was quite perceptive, because it's 20 years later, we saw the Holocaust played out by Islamists in Israel on October 7th. So what must people understand about the connection of the founders of the modern Islamist movement and Adolf Hitler?
Right, that's a good question, and this has been the insight of the film and the book, is that there is a straight line from the Holocaust to the radical Islamist war against the Jews that are happening today, and frankly, a straight line against Judeo-Christian values and America. This is a war against the West, just like Nazis were against Jews and Christians and America, so also the radical Islamists are against Jews and Christians and America. It is the same war, and this is what we need to understand. The leader of the Palestinian National Movement, a great terrorist in his day, pioneer in terrorism, he spent the war years in Berlin as a guest of Adolf Hitler. And Adolf Hitler worked with him, was an ally of him, and passed on his ideology, and was going to come to the Middle East to kill the Jews if he was victorious. And he told the Mufti, put this in your heart, that this war is really about the Jews against the Germans only. Germans against the Jews, really. It was an ideological war. And in that war, he was also against Christianity. And so we need to know that this is a continuing, ongoing war that we need to be vigilant about. And when I say we, I don't mean just Jews. I mean Americans as well.
And in your book, Who is Afraid of the Big Bad Jew, it preceded the Tragic Awakening film. So how does it differ from the movie, other than one is visual, the other is written?
Well, obviously in a book you can go so much deeper into it. And what I call both the film and the book is an inspirational look at anti-Semitism. The subtitle of the book is Learning to Love the Lessons of Jew Hatred. If we understand the nature of Jew hatred, we can actually get a tremendous amount of respect and pride. We can get moral self-confidence, because evil finds the Jews, and it's not a coincidence. Anti-Semitism is not a coincidence. So if we can understand this as Jews, we can have moral self-confidence. As non-Jews, we can get on the right side of history. The book goes so much deeper into, for example, the film touches on Adolf Hitler's ideology. The book, an entire chapter, and the Jewish impact, how we have brought the Judeo-Christian values with the help of Christianity into the world, the impact of the Jewish people. I go into tremendous depth. And of course, the most important thing, the inspiration for what it means to Jews and non-Jews to fight the spiritual battle that really anti-Semitism is all about. That's the core. We can rise and fight this because it's a spiritual phenomena that needs to be fought spiritually as well as physically.
I want to ask you about that again in a moment, but I found it interesting in the book you have a section called Another Enemy, Christianity. And you quote Hitler stating that Christianity is an invention of sick brains, and he said the Bible is Jewish mumbo-jumbo. You write that he hated Christianity because of its core values. Explain that.
Well, again, this is part of for some reason, we, and I mean Americans or Canadians, that we've been taught a very mistaken narrative on what World War II was about and the Holocaust and what Hitler was about. We've been raised to believe Hitler was just an evil nut job who had no coherent thoughts in his brain. In fact, he had a very coherent ideology that was consistent from 1920 to 1945 till his dying breath. And that ideology was that the Jewish people brought a set of ideas into the world that were humanitarianism, love your neighbor, peace on earth, God, ethical monotheism, that he opposed because he believed in survival of the fittest, might makes right, etc. Those two ideologies were opposite. He looks at the world and he says, the Jewish ideology is winning. Why? Because of Christianity. Because Christianity was really the major force that brought these ideas into the world. So the Western world, European civilization, was now based on these foundational ideas, Judeo-Christian values. Hitler said, I must wipe them out. Of course, he was strategic, and he went for the Jews first. The Jews are always the canary in the coal mine. But he was explicit in his writings. It was more secretive, but in his writings and in his personal discussions, he was consistent. He was going to destroy Christianity next because religion and Nazism cannot get along. That was clear. And we need to understand that's today as well.
You are a rabbi. I'm assuming you view many of our political challenges through a spiritual lens. So you touched on this. So what's really going on here? Why this rise in hatred and bigotry against the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob?
Very foundational idea that we explore in the film and the book, and that is that, and this is the shocking thing, that I just explained Adolf Hitler's view. It turns out that the Bible's explanation of anti-Semitism corresponds to Adolf Hitler's explanation of anti-Semitism. In other words, the Bible says, and we go into depth in this, that at Mount Sinai, the Talmud says this, at Mount Sinai hatred came into the world. When God delivered his message to the Jewish people, the revelation at Mount Sinai, he delivered the 10 Commandments and the set of principles and morality that were going to guide humanity and help elevate humanity from being more of a physical or pagan man to an elevated spiritual, moral, sophisticated human being. When that message was delivered and the Jewish people were tasked as messengers of this to bring it to humanity, hatred came into the world. In other words, anti-Semitism is a resistance to the Jewish message of Mount Sinai. Hitler said the same thing. So that is the spiritual and real reason of why people are fighting the Jews. But again, it's civilizational, because this is the story of humanity. For all human history, we are trying to elevate. We're trying to get there, and when we see society breaking down, when we see university campuses exploding with anti-Semitism, that's the time to get worried about what's going on in American society today, because it means there's a breakdown and a fight going on against those core Judeo-Christian values. Okay, it comes down to a heart issue. Leviticus 19:18 tells us to love your neighbor as yourself. Raphael Shore, thank you for joining us here at CBN.
Thank you very much, Gary.
God bless you.
Thank you. Take care.
During his first 6 weeks in office, President Trump made it clear he will stand against countries treating American companies unfairly. He's enacted a policy of reciprocal tariffs and recently signed an executive order investigating how the European Union uses digital service taxes, DTSs, against American big tech. Here to explain is senior fellow at the Lexington Institute, Paul Steidler. Paul, tell us how the EU uses DTSs to lower the competitiveness of U.S. big tech.
Well, digital service taxes can be thought of as corporate lawfare. And corporate lawfare is simply using sophisticated, unjustified ways to tax companies for services that they provide unfairly compared to other companies, and to also impose fines and other sanctions against them. What the EU has done has been analogous to what a credit card fraudster would do, and that's put together some small charges of $5, $10 before going for the big charge. They've been taking $1 billion here, $1 billion there, but they potentially could ask for hundreds of billions of dollars in fines. President Trump is very attuned to this. He addressed this at the Davos conference 3 days into office on January 23rd. And on February the 21st, he issued a very strong, very specific executive order directed at the European Union to say, cut this stuff out. And this is going to lead, this is basically going to be viewed as an attack on American businesses that will be met with reciprocity. And it, by extension, has to be included in things like tariff discussions and other things that are out there. So it's a very strong, forceful, and appropriate response from the president.
Well, last week, President Trump met, of course, with French President Macron and British Prime Minister Starmer. News reports primarily focused on Ukraine, but tariffs and trade were also part of that discussion. So what were the outcomes of the meetings? Did the two European leaders make any commitments to ease the DTSs and unfair tariffs against products and U.S. companies?
Well, we, for all intents and purposes, can forget about France. France's minister at the European Union has been one of the chief architects of driving these sanctions. The more important and I think very encouraging development were the discussions that were held with UK Prime Minister Starmer. There is clearly a opening in the United Kingdom for them to take a less onerous approach to U.S. tech than the 27 countries in the European Union have done.
What do you see that's happening here? Are we witnessing a split in the U.S.-European alliance?
Well, there are major long-term economic issues that the United States has to take up with the European Union. That said, the U.S.-European trade relationship, both for countries in the European Union and the small number of countries in Europe that are outside of it, has generally been a very mutually beneficial thing. It's helped both companies for decades. There's a lot of European company investments here in the U.S. So we right now do have some serious problems with Europe economically. What they are looking to do in the form of digital service taxes is just an audacious corporate lawfare-loving cash grab of U.S. companies that has no justification.
Well, finally, I've got to ask you, Vice President J.D. Vance received a chilly reception at the Munich conference when he criticized Europe for violating the free speech rights of social media companies and European citizens. Then he brought it up again during Prime Minister Starmer's visit to the White House. What's the truth in this situation? I know you deal with economics, but the speech affects the economics.
The bottom line is that free speech is a cherished American value, and we have greater levels of free speech here in the United States than anywhere else in the world. And that includes the United Kingdom, and that includes Germany. And there are a number of roadblocks that come into play where Americans could potentially be held liable for breaking U.S. or German laws for certain posts that they put out there or certain things that they say. They don't withstand the common sense test here. And the vice president was spot on in calling this out in Munich. He also called it out a couple days earlier at a speech to the AI summit in Paris, where he ruffled a lot of world leaders' feathers. And this is just something that the U.S. is going to have to take a very strong position on. If something can be said in the public square, if it's not a death threat, if it's not sexually exploitative material, especially of a minor, someone should be able to say it online and not fear getting into deep legal trouble because they're expressing an opinion. And it's great to see that this administration gets that and is pushing for that, because this is one of those things, if you nip it in the bud or you take care of it early on, it'll be a lot easier than if you just sit back and let it grow and fester and become highly problematic.
Okay, we're definitely in a new era here. Paul Steidler, Senior Fellow at the Lexington Institute Public Policy Think Tank. Thank you, Paul, for sharing your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary. Always a pleasure.
During this week's UN session, the remarks of a Lebanese-Syrian peace activist, Rawan Osman, caught my attention, and I felt compelled to share them. Osman spoke about the war in Gaza and took on Arab governments, contending Israel is not the problem.
Last week, Israel buried Shiri Bibas with her children Ariel and Kfir. Hamas said they had been arrested. Forensic reports show they were choked to death in Gaza. But many who point fingers at Israel might do better to look in the mirror. I ask Qatar, why didn't you arrest the Hamas chiefs in Doha and demand release of the hostages? Why did you finance terror? And I ask Iran, why do you send billions to Hamas and Hezbollah instead of liberating your own people who are suffering oppression and poverty? Egypt, you charged Gazans thousands of dollars to escape the war. How can you lecture about the morality of displacing Gazans? Jordan, why have you refused to accept any Gazans? Are they not your own people? Lebanon, instead of discussing Hezbollah's political role, ban the party. Syria, if the new president is sincere about his transformation, I ask him to return the body of Eli Cohen. It's been 6 decades. Allow his wife to bury him before she dies. Hamas abuses dead bodies. Be a better Arab. Be a better Muslim. Thank you.
Cohen was an Israeli spy hanged in Damascus in 1965. Returning his body would be a grateful gesture toward Israel, the Syrian neighbor that El-Jilani credits with helping him to eliminate the threat and influence of Hezbollah and Iran. As for Gaza and the hypocrisy of Arab leaders regarding a solution, publicly they defiantly shout, "Down with the Zionists and free Palestine." Privately, they despise the Palestinians and arrogantly whisper, "Not in my neighborhood." Their approach is to pay them money to fight and oppose the Jews. That way, they won't come to their countries and cause unrest. Folks, post-war plans for Gaza must be negotiated soon. There must be the same sense of urgency as there is for ending the war in Ukraine. Israel is no longer limited by an American administration that was more sympathetic to Hamas terrorists than to its closest Middle Eastern ally. There's a new sheriff in town. President Trump envisions a new Gaza of beautiful seaside hotels, homes, and businesses. Most Israelis only want to see the remaining hostages returned and the Gaza Strip free of Hamas. Well, that's it today from the Global Lane. Until next time, be blessed.